Our final presentation in the regulation and enforcement section is Chantel Weber. She's with UFIFAS in Panama City Bay County, and she and Scott Jackson put this together, but Chantel's going to make her presentation.
Thanks so much. All right, so while I'm getting this presentation together, I appreciate you for giving me the introduction. I'm a native Floridian, seventh generation in the state. My family is actually one of the founding families in the state of Florida. We helped to establish 3 different counties back in the late 1800s, which is pretty cool. So now I operate as the resource coordinator with Scott Jackson, and I take great pleasure in that because I've got a deeply vested interest in protecting our state. Right. So I've been with Bay County going on 2 years. I lived overseas for a little while, became an educator with National Geographic, and then moved up here in 2021. So it's a little bit of a different dynamic. I enjoy doing the artificial reef side of things with Scott, but then opening the door to derelict vessel removals has been great. We've got a wonderful team that operates out of the Navy base on Thomas Drive in Panama City. We communicate regularly with them. And one of the things that I take pride in is that as a resource manager, there's a lot of public involvement with stakeholders, which allows me to mitigate issues and kind of dissolve that demonization of regulation. I think there are a lot of straightforward processes that people tend to glaze over. So if we can be that intermediate body for the public, it makes everything so much easier. For today's presentation, the few things that I'll go over are the derelict vessel removal grants. I've focused on one in the past year. They're, like I said, they're pretty straightforward. And the county responsibilities, assistance and support from FWC, and then some of our success stories. So with FWC, there are 2 types of removals. We have rapid removal, which basically means the vessel is in imminent danger of sinking or hitting property. We have instances where I might get a phone call and there's a sailboat more often than not that might end up hitting a residential seawall. And so we'll make the call to try and get that removed as quickly as possible. Other removals, similar to what Pebbles and Phil brought up, were the bulk removals. And that's something that takes a greater amount of time. There's really not an immediate emergency response for those. All right, so the most important part when we're getting these grants together is that the cases must be in the statewide derelict vessel database. If they're not in the database, if someone calls and complains about a vessel in their backyard, if FWC hasn't registered as derelict yet, then our hands are kind of removed from the situation. Otherwise, that opens the door for us to call our officers and go make a case of the vessel if it hasn't been addressed yet. All right, there are a handful of steps in order to get these grants awarded to the county. The first is going to the FWC website, making sure your documentation is in order. And it's as simple as putting in your information. I operate out of the county as well. My position straddles the county and the state. So I do work for the University of Florida and then perform marine science services on behalf of the county. So we do the rapid removal. You can choose which you'd like to do with your county. There's the selection boxes there circled. The other parts of this are the removal authorization letter. Whenever a vessel is deemed derelict, the first thing that an officer does is build his report, and that includes the authorization letter. That means he's gone through the steps of filing the 3 citations. Scott and I are typically notified when that happens. In the past, we had access to the FWC website where we could go into their program and see which vessels had been green lighted. And you can, let me move my mouse over so you can see. So this middle file here, you can see, if I can move this for you, you can see that the document, there's a green dot underneath here, but you can see which files have been green lighted. Others, there's a red dot, which means that they're not available yet or they haven't been processed with a letter of authorization. But now this just, again, more communication. That's our contingency here. just to be involved with the officers. So we get our letter of authorization. It lists the vessel name, the size, the number as well. So it has the whole identification number, type, all of the pertinent information you need to know before filing. So we take that, and then the more important bit is that we gather photos, because when our contractors are applying to bid on this for the request for proposals, they need to know what they're going after. So we've got the picture of the sailboat, and this one has become derelict. And there are some other examples I'll go over later where it's not so obvious that there's a boat in the location on this authorization letter. Let's use the clicker if it's not going to work. Oh, well. Okay. I do apologize. Another technology is a little weird today. All right. So here's our draft application. This is one that I worked on last year. We had our coastal resource coordinator with the county switch over. Where, like I said, my position, it's a straddle between the state and the county. Alan solely worked for the county and had put this together. So my first day on the job, working with derelict vessels was actually my birthday. So he said, well, I've got a surprise. We're gonna go over to Steelfield and you're gonna be at the landfill all day. So that's what we did. And I thought it was pretty fascinating. And we had 11 vessels at the time. There was one added to the list, which is not on here, but you can see we went through, we've got the cover letter, our application, the contractor had to submit a proposal. And so I know it's changed. Originally, I know it was $1,000 per foot for a vessel that was floating. I'm sure Phil can address that question during lunch. There's a substantial difference in cost when a vessel's completely submerged versus it being floating on the surface. So beyond that, we have our vessel sheet. We move on through the application process. FWC approves. Just want to make sure we've got 5 minutes for a break, and I don't want to run over for you. So once that's approved, our contractors submit their RFP with the price, and we move forward. That allows our county commissioners here to give approvals. We've got the price, so they can provide the proposed cost for each vessel to be removed. Like I said, I go off $1,000 a foot. So if it's a 65-foot vessel, typically that'd be a $65,000 cost for removal. And then for documentation, it's all very straightforward. When we work with Steelfield, our landfill, we have to provide a tipping fee waiver, so FWC knows how much to reimburse the county. So I keep track of those for all 11 vessels. There are 11 separate tipping fee waivers. There are also tickets that I get back just as proof that the vessel went through and was processed. And we have to provide photos in 3 stages. There's going to be at the top left, you'll see a photo of this particular vessel, which is hard aground on the shoreline. So we'll have that. We have a picture of the vessel being processed by the contractor. And the very last photo you'll see is the vessel being removed from the trailer into Steelfield, where it gets crushed and demolished. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes it's not so obvious when a vessel's derelict. This is one particular instance where last year we had a vessel that was about 11 feet underwater. It was a storm impacted vessel from Michael that happened to be wrapped into the rapid removal grant. And so FWC goes through, it is marked with a buoy, as Phil said. FWC goes through, it's marked in red, so we know where it's at. And the picture here shows that it had been down for some time, fully encrusted, and it took a little bit of time. This introduces some hazards to the environment. You've got pieces that will fall off and remain on the bottom. And so our contractors have to make a concerted effort to make sure that all of this scrap material that's broken off is completely removed. And a lot of times, some of them like to cut corners. I think that's fairly obvious for those of us in the room that have dealt with it. And so you don't want to micromanage, but in a sense, you need to cut time out of your day to be on site and make sure that these rules are being upheld. We're trying to keep our waterways clean. We want navigable waters in Florida. Tourism is the bulk of, our funding here, and why we're able to use these dollars through FWC to keep the waters clean. So for me, like I said earlier, it's important that we hold the contractors accountable, we hold the owners accountable. And then the last bit, when we close out our documentation, we go through with all of these photos. So I compile everything for each particular vessel. I'll have the tipping fee waiver, the ticket, the photos, and we'll go through with the county. They submit an invoice to FWC, and it takes about 7 to 10 business days for them to fully communicate and for the county to be reimbursed, and for the contractor to be paid out. That's the last bit. If you need help along the way, Phil Horning is a very valuable resource, along with any of your officers, along with Jennifer Tyler. They're very active in communication, very quick to respond. I love working with them. And Jessica Napier, I've not met, but did you? Okay. All right. So I look forward to meeting her shortly. If you have any questions, again, reach out to them, myfwc.com/DV grant. And examples of our success very quickly. Over $200,000 was used to remove 21 vessels in between 21 and 22. Beyond that, there were some points that I wanted to bring up. As of March 2022, FWC announced that there were over 1 million registered vessels in the state of Florida, which is very significant. We're hitting an apex now in the state. That's an unprecedented number. So I appreciate everyone who puts the time and effort in to do the removals. For those of you that work in resource management, I hope to speak with you more in the future as we work on these projects together. And with that,